legions faded, and the great empire crumbled into dust and legend. And that is true, but it is only half the truth. For while the western half of Rome slipped away, the eastern half did not. It lived on, not for a year, not for a century, but for 1,000 more years, in a shining city built upon the water between two continents, an empire that outlived its own beginning by 10 centuries, an empire whose people called themselves Romans until their very last morning. And then, when at last it was gone, it faded so softly from the world's memory that most of us never learn it was there at all. Tonight, by the fire, let me tell you about the empire the world forgot. But first, come in, come in. Set down whatever you were carrying today and let it rest by the door. You don't need it here. Draw the chair a little closer to the hearth, the way you like it, and feel how warm the old stones have grown. The candles are already lit. I lit them for you. The rain, if there is rain where you are, can stay outside the window. In here there is only the fire and the long shelves of books fading up into the shadows, and my voice. Let your shoulders come down. Let the day loosen its hold on you finger by finger. There is nowhere else you must be tonight, and nothing you must do, except grow warm and heavy and comfortable in that chair. And should you drift off before the story ends, and I rather hope you do, you needn't worry, not even a little. You will miss nothing. The tale will keep. The books are patient, and so am I. And the fire will burn just the same, whether you are awake to see it or not. Sleep whenever you like. That is why you came. So settle in, dear friend. Let me turn to the beginning of the page, and let me tell you a very old story. Our story begins with an emperor who could not sleep, though not the way you and I settle toward sleep now, gently and by choice. This was the Emperor Constantine, Constantine, and the year, if you care to hold a number in your mind before you let it go, was a little after the year 300. Constantine ruled a Rome that was already very tired. It had grown too vast for one man or even one city to hold. The old capital, Rome herself, sat far to the west, aging and quarrelsome, her best days behind her, like a long afternoon sliding toward dusk. And Constantine, looking east across his great domain, felt the pull of something newer. He wanted a fresh beginning, a second Rome, a capital of his own making, unburdened by the old rivalries and the old ghosts. So he went searching, the way a man walks his land at evening, looking for the right place to build a home. And on the far eastern edge of Europe, where the continent reaches out toward Asia and very nearly touches it, he found it. There stood a small and ancient Greek town, already 1,000 years old, called Byzantium, Byzantium. It was a modest place then, easy to overlook, but its position was a gift from the gods themselves. Picture it softly, if you will. A narrow ribbon of water, cool and blue-gray, threading between two continents. Europe on one side, Asia on the other, so close you might imagine calling across from shore to shore. Whoever held this water held the door between two worlds, the gateway through which all trade, all ships, all armies must pass. And thrust out into it, sheltered in green, was a triangle of land guarded by the sea on two of its three sides, so that an enemy might come at it from only one direction. A place, in other words, that could be defended by a small number of tired men against a great many determined ones. Constantine saw all of this, and his heart was decided. Here he would build his new Rome, and build he did, not slowly, not carefully, but with the glorious impatience of a man who wishes to see his dream finished within his own lifetime. Workers came in their thousands. Marble and columns were carried in from across the empire. Whole statues were lifted from older distant cities and set up to adorn the new one, so that the young capital wore the borrowed jewelry of the ancient world. Great walls rose, broad avenues were laid, a palace, a forum, a hippodrome for the chariot races that the people loved. And in the year 330, Constantine dedicated his city with solemn ceremony and gave it his own name, Constantinople, Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Rest with that image a moment, a brand new capital, gleaming and raw and full of promise, sitting astride the water that joined the world together. No one alive that day could have known what it would become or how very, very long it would endure, because here is the quiet miracle at the heart of our story. In the years that followed, the empire was formally divided, an eastern half and a western half, two brothers sharing one inheritance, and the western half, the old half, the half with Rome herself at its center, sickened and weakened, and at last, in the year 476, simply came to an end. The final Western emperor, a boy, was set aside, and no one troubled to name another. That is the ending we all remember. That is the fall of Rome. But the eastern half, ruled from Constantine's shining city by the water, did not fall. It did not even stumble. It went on and on and on. Its people still called themselves Romans, and their empire the Roman Empire, and they were not wrong to do so, for they truly were the same unbroken line, flowing on like a river whose western branch had dried while the eastern ran full and strong. We have given them another name since, the Byzantines, after that little old town of Byzantium. But they would not have known that word nor liked it. To themselves, always and to the very end, they were Rome. And their 1,000-year evening was only just beginning. Let the fire draw your eyes for a moment, the low orange heart of it, and let me carry you forward now past a scattering of lesser emperors to the man who raised the empire to its brightest golden morning. His name was Justinian, and he came to the throne about 200 years after Constantine built his city. He had risen from very humble roots, a peasant's family from the countryside, and perhaps that is why he worked as he did, for he was famous above all things for how little he rested. They called him the Emperor who never sleeps, pacing the palace corridors deep into the night, turning over his great plans while the city slumbered around him, a restless soul. And yet, out of all that restlessness, he made things of astonishing and lasting beauty. He did not do it alone. Beside him sat one of the most remarkable women of the whole long story, the Empress Theodora. She had come from the very bottom of the world, the daughter of a bear keeper at the circus, a performer, a woman the proud nobles sneered at. And she became the wisest and strongest voice at Justinian's side, his truest counselor, a partner in every sense, There is a famous moment, which I will tell you gently, when the city rose in a great and frightening riot, and the fires spread, and Justinian, frightened, made ready to flee and abandon everything. It was Theodora who stopped him, who spoke calmly and firmly, and said in her way that she would rather stay and die an empress than run and live as nothing. And he stayed, and the throne was saved. Much of what we will admire tonight exists because a bearkeeper's daughter kept her nerve when an emperor lost his. Now Justinian gave the world two great gifts, and I want you to hold them softly, like two smooth stones in the hand. The first you cannot see, but you live inside it still. Justinian gathered his wisest lawyers and set them a patient, enormous task, to take the vast, tangled centuries of Roman law, all its rulings and contradictions and forgotten decrees, and to sort them, clear them, and set them down in good order so that justice might be found without wandering a maze. This great work of tidying became the foundation of law across much of the world for 1,000 years and more. When you hear, even today, of the roots of Western law, you are hearing a faint echo of the sleepless emperor's clerks, bent over their scrolls in the lamplight, bringing order out of confusion. But the second gift you can see, and it is the one I love best. Justinian wished to build a church, not merely a fine church, but a greatest house of worship the world had ever known. And so he raised the Hagia Sophia, which means holy wisdom. He gave the work to two brilliant men, a geometer and a builder, and told them, in effect, to make something that had never been made before. What they made was a miracle in stone. Its great dome was so wide and set so high, and rested upon such a clever ring of windows that when the light poured through, the whole roof seemed not to sit upon the walls at all, but to hang, weightless, from the heavens by a golden thread. Inside, it was all soft gold and colored marble and quiet, drifting incense, a space so vast and so full of gentle light that those who entered scarcely believed it had been built by human hands. When Justinian first walked into the finished church, the old story says he stood beneath that floating dome, overcome, and thought of the wisest king of the ancient scriptures, and murmured that he had surpassed even him. Whether he truly said the words, we cannot know. But standing there, I think any of us might have felt the same. Justinian dreamed larger still. He sent his armies west, hoping to win back the lost lands of old Rome, and for a time he did, gathering Italy and North Africa back beneath the eagles, so that the Mediterranean was, for one shining generation, a Roman sea once more. But such things are heavy to hold. The wars drained the treasury, a terrible plague swept through the empire and thinned its people, and the reconquered land so hard to win would slip away again in the years after he was gone. Still, for one long, luminous morning, the empire had touched its height, and high above the water, the great dome of holy wisdom caught the sun, as it would go on catching the sun for nearly 1,000 years yet to come. The candle has burned down a little. I'll trim it, and we'll go on. Now you may be wondering, and it is a fair thing to wonder drowsily by the fire, how a single city could stand for so very long, 1,000 years and more, when all around it empires rose and crumbled like sand castles at the edge of the tide. How did Constantinople endure when Rome herself had fallen? The answer, my friend, is partly stone and partly a secret. Let us begin with stone. Long after Constantine, a later emperor named Theodosius, gave the city the finest set of walls the ancient or medieval world had ever seen. And these were no simple ramparts. Picture them slowly, layer upon layer, the way you might build up warmth beneath a heavy quilt. First, before an attacker could even reach the walls, there lay a wide moat, a deep channel that could be flooded with water. Beyond the moat rose a low outer wall, and a terrace behind it where defenders could stand, and beyond that rose the great inner wall, enormously thick and tall as several houses stacked together, studded all along its length with mighty towers, from which the defenders could look down upon anyone foolish enough to come close. So an enemy who wished to take the city had first to cross the water of the moat, and then to break the outer wall, and then to cross the killing ground behind it, and then, wearied, exposed, and dwindling, to face the towering inner wall, still fresh and unbroken, with the defenders raining down upon them from above. For 1,000 years, army after army looked upon those triple walls and despaired. They held back Persians and Avars, Arabs and Bulgars, one hopeful conqueror after another, sending them home with nothing. The land walls of Constantinople were quite simply the reason the empire lived so long. They were the shell around a pearl. But walls guard only the land. And Constantinople, you'll remember, was a city of the water, ringed by the sea on 2 of its 3 sides. Against a fleet, stone was not enough. And so we come to the secret, the strangest and most famous weapon of the whole Byzantine age. They called it simply Greek fire. Here is the wonderful, sleepy mystery of it. We do not know what it was. Truly, we don't. The Byzantines guarded the recipe so jealously, kept it so tightly among so few hands, passed it down so quietly from one careful keeper to the next, that in time the secret was lost even to them. And it has never, in all the centuries since, been rediscovered. Scholars have guessed and argued and tried to recreate it, and still the truth slips through their fingers like water. It is one of history's genuinely unsolved recipes, a lost page we cannot read. What we do know is what it did, and it must have seemed, to those who saw it, like something out of a nightmare or a legend. It was a liquid fire, pumped through bronze tubes mounted on the prows of the imperial ships, that shot out in a roaring stream and set enemy vessels ablaze. And here was the terror of it. It burned even upon the water. You could not put it out by the ordinary means. Water only seemed to feed it, spreading the flames across the waves so that the very sea appeared to catch fire. An enemy fleet, sailing confidently up toward the golden city, might suddenly find the water around them turning to flame, their ships alight, their hopes drowned and burning both at once. Twice, great Arab fleets came to besiege the city, hoping to end the empire for good, and twice, in large part, it was this dreadful fire on the water that turned them back and saved the day. You can understand why the Byzantines kept the secret so close. It was not merely a weapon, it was their guardian angel with a sword of flame, standing between them and the end of the world. And so between the two of them, the patient stone upon the land and the secret fire upon the sea, the great city was kept safe through century after century. Empires beyond its walls were born and died. Faiths and languages shifted across the map. And still, Constantinople stood, gleaming above the water, its dome catching the light, its walls unbroken, its fire held in reserve, a candle that would not blow out, however hard the winds of the world came howling against it. For a long, long while, it seemed the city might stand forever. But nothing stands forever, my friend. Not empires, not cities, not even the brightest of flames. And in the chapters to come, our story grows quieter and gentler and begins its long, slow turning toward evening. Let me lower my voice a little now, for the part of the story that follows is a soft and wistful one. There is no great crash here, no single dreadful blow. There is only the slow, quiet shrinking of something that had once been vast. The way a long summer afternoon, without your ever quite noticing the moment, begins to lengthen its shadows and cool toward dusk. For a long time, the empire had been not only enduring, but strong, holding wide lands across Asia Minor, that great peninsula to the east, the true heartland, where its farms and its soldiers and its people were rooted. This was the empire's deep, sustaining soil. From here came the grain that fed the city and the young men who filled the armies. As long as this heartland held, the empire, whatever troubles came, could always mend itself and rise again. And then came a day, I will tell it to you gently, for it is a sorrowful one, far out in the east at a place called Manzikert, in the year 1071. A new people had come riding out of the further east, the Seljuk Turks, Seljuk, and the emperor marched out with a great army to meet them and turn them back. It should not have ended as it did. But through misfortune and mistrust and betrayal within his own ranks, some of his own commanders, it is said, simply rode away and left him. The emperor's army came apart on that distant field, and the emperor himself was taken captive by the enemy. It is a strange and quiet kind of tragedy, not a slaughter so much as a coming undone. The battle itself, in truth, was not the great disaster. Armies are lost and rebuilt all the time. The disaster was what followed, for in the confusion and the quarreling that came after, with the empire turning inward to fight over its own throne, no one properly guarded the eastern gates, and through them, over the following years, the Turkish peoples came, not as a raid, but as a settling tide, spreading slowly across that rich Asian heartland, the very soil that had fed the empire for 700 years. And this time, the land did not come back. Little by little, that great reservoir of farms and soldiers passed out of Roman hands for good. Rest with the sadness of that a moment, softly. It is the sadness of a thing that cannot be undone, not a wound that bleeds and heals, but a slow letting go. The empire did not die at Manzikert. It lived on for centuries yet, but it was, from that day, a smaller and a poorer and a more fragile thing, leaning more and more upon the strength of others, hiring foreign soldiers to fight its battles because it had fewer sons of its own to send. An empire that had once commanded the Mediterranean now watched its edges dissolve quietly, year by year, like the last of the snow retreating up the mountainside in spring. There were bright spells still. Able emperors arose who steadied things for a while, who won back a province here, who held the line there, who welcomed clever advisers and rebuilt what they could. A family called the Komnenoi, gave the empire a long, warm second afternoon, a recovery gentle and real, so that for a time the city glittered again and the court shone. History is kind enough to grant such reprieves, long golden hours when the light seems almost to hold still, and those living within them may almost believe the evening will never come. But the shape of things had changed, and in their hearts, perhaps the wisest of them knew it. The empire was no longer the great sun at the center of the world. It had become, instead, one power among many, older and prouder than the rest, wrapped in the memory of its own greatness, a little like an aged scholar who was once the most learned man in the land, and who sits now by his own fire, still wise, still gracious, but knowing that the world has quietly moved along without him. The afternoon was long, my friend. It was gentle, and it had its beauty. But it was, unmistakably now, an afternoon, and the shadows were growing longer across the floor. I'll turn the page quietly, and we'll go on toward the evening. Of all the turns in our long story, this next one is perhaps the saddest. And yet, I will tell it to you softly, without anger, the way one tells of an old sorrow that has long since made its peace with the world. You must understand that by now the empire had grown weary and worn, and it looked westward for friends. Far away in the west, the old lands of fallen Rome had become a patchwork of Christian kingdoms, and in those days a great fervor had taken hold of them. The fervor of the Crusades, when knights by the thousand took up the cross and sailed east, meaning to journey to the Holy Land. The Byzantines and these Western Crusaders shared a faith, more or less, though the two branches of Christianity had drifted apart over the centuries, like two rooms of the same great house whose doors had slowly closed. Still, they were meant to be friends, allies, brothers in the same cause. And so, when a great new crusade gathered and came sailing toward Constantinople, the city had every reason to hope for friendship. But this crusade had lost its way, not upon the sea, but in its own purposes. It was deeply in debt to the merchants who had built its ships, and it had no money to pay them, and it had grown hungry and quarrelsome and easily turned. And there, gleaming upon the water before them, lay the richest city in all the Christian world, its palaces heavy with gold, its churches bright with treasure, gathered over 900 years. Temptation is a slow poison, my friend, and it worked upon them. Drawn in first by a tangled quarrel over who should sit upon the Byzantine throne, the Crusaders found reason, and then excuse, and at last simply appetite. And in the spring of the year 1204, the men who had come as guests turned upon their host. I will not dwell on the hard details, for it is nearly time for sleep, and they do not make for gentle dreaming. Let it be enough to say that the great city, which no foreign enemy had broken in nearly 1,000 years, not Persian, not Arab, not all the fleets that Greek fire had turned back upon the burning sea, was broken at last from within by those who wore the same cross its people prayed beneath. For 3 days the city was plundered. Ancient treasures were carried off across the water to the west, where some of them may still be seen to this day, far from the home that made them. The bronze horses, the golden vessels, the relics gathered over centuries, scattered, melted, borne away. And here is the quiet heart of the tragedy. The empire did not end that day, but something in it broke that would never quite be mended. The Crusaders set up their own rulers in the conquered city and divided its lands among themselves. And for nearly 60 years the Byzantines were exiles from their own capital, keeping their memory and their claim alive in the smaller courts to which they had fled. They did return. That is the tender, stubborn thing about this people. They were forever returning. After those long years of exile, a Byzantine emperor at last won the city back and walked once more beneath the great dome of holy wisdom, and there was joy and weeping and thanksgiving. But the empire he reclaimed was a faded and threadbare thing, a shadow of a shadow. The treasury was empty. The provinces were scattered and few. The old strength was gone, spent, carried away over the sea in the holds of foreign ships. It was as though a beloved old house, having survived 1,000 storms, had at last been ransacked by those it had welcomed in from the cold. And though the family came home again and lit the fires and swept the floors, the house was never again quite what it had been. So the empire lived on into its final century, smaller and poorer than ever. A proud old realm shrunk almost to the walls of its one great city, surrounded now on every side by a new and rising power. It endured as it had always endured, but it endured now the way a single candle endures in a wide and darkening room, giving its small, steady, stubborn light, while the night gathers gently at the edges of the glass. Rest easy, though. There is no cruelty in what remains of our story, only a quiet ending and a long peace after. And so we come, my dear friend, to the final chapter, the softest of all. And if your eyes have grown heavy, you may let them close now and simply listen and let the ending come to you like the last warmth of the fire on your face. By the middle of the 15th century, the great Roman Empire of the East had dwindled to almost nothing at all. Little remained but the city itself, Constantinople, the ancient jewel by the water, still ringed by its mighty walls, but with few defenders left to stand upon them. All around it had risen a great and vigorous new empire, the Ottomans, who now held the lands on every side, so that the old Christian city sat alone within their world like a single candle left burning in a room the dawn had not yet reached. Upon the throne in these last days sat an emperor named Constantine, the same name you'll notice softly as the man who had founded the city 11 centuries before. The first Constantine had raised it. The last Constantine would see its evening. There is a gentle symmetry in that, the kind history sometimes offers, as though the long story wished to close its own circle. In the spring of the year 1453, the young Ottoman Sultan brought his great army to the walls, and with him something new, enormous cannon, greater than any the world had yet seen, that could do what no army in 1,000 years had managed, and at last batter the ancient stone. For weeks the siege went on, and the defenders, few as they were, held the walls with a quiet and desperate courage, mending by night what was broken by day. The old emperor did not flee. When the end came, the stories tell us, he set aside the marks of his royal rank so that he might not be known, and went down into the fighting at the breach in the walls, and was lost there among his people. No grand death, no monument, simply a man vanishing into the defense of the city he loved. Where he fell or where he was laid, no one has ever known. The truth is lost to us, and perhaps it is gentler so. And on that spring morning, after 1,100 years, the city passed at last out of Roman hands. The long, long story of Rome, which had begun, if you follow the thread all the way back, with a little town on 7 hillsides in Italy, came quietly to its close, not in the west, where we always look for it, but here in the east, by the water, in a city most of the world had already forgotten was Roman at all. The great church of holy wisdom still stood, its floating dome still catching the morning light as it had for 900 years, and it stands there yet in the city we now call Istanbul. For the place itself did not die, only the empire did. The walls still trace their long line across the land, and that is a comforting thing, I think, as we drift toward sleep. That the stones remain, that some beautiful things outlast even the empires that made them. Why did the world forget this empire when it remembered so faithfully the fall of the Western Rome? Perhaps because it spoke Greek and not Latin, and the Western scholars who wrote our histories looked past it. Perhaps because it faded so slowly, over so many centuries, that there was never one great crash to fix it in the memory. Perhaps because a thing that quietly endures is somehow easier to overlook than a thing that dramatically falls. And yet it was there all that time, 1,000 years of Rome, living on past its own supposed ending, keeping the old lamp lit in the long night of the world. And there, my friend, our story comes to rest. Think of it, as you settle deeper now, an empire that lived 1,000 years past the fall we all remember, and then slipped so softly out of the world's memory that we had almost to rediscover it. There is no sadness left in that tonight, only a kind of quiet wonder, for nothing that has truly lived is ever wholly lost. The laws of the sleepless emperor still flow beneath the laws of our own age. The great dome he raised still floats upon its ring of light. And the memory of that stubborn, gentle, enduring city lives on, kept among other places here in a small candlelit library and told to you tonight by the fire. That is what libraries are for, after all, to remember what the world forgets, to keep the old lamps burning, to hold the long stories safe until someone comes some quiet evening wishing to hear them. You came tonight, and I thank you for it. The fire has burned low now, and that is exactly as it should be. The books are back upon their shelves, and the city sleeps behind its walls, and there is nothing left for you to do but rest. So close your eyes, if they are not already closed. Let the last of the warmth settle over you like a soft blanket drawn up to the chin. The story is finished, and it will keep, and it will be here again whenever you wish to return. Sleep now, dear friend. Sleep deeply and well. The library will keep its long watch, and the fire its low glow. And I will wish you, as I always do, a very good night.